Posted by you/half. Oh Fabrain Cell. What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? Early into my now wife and I's relationship, I had a dream about her in childbirth. Very vivid, and long. Like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver, things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally but brushed it off. I am a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic OB situations before, and I chalked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later and my wife is pregnant. I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I am on shift. Wife is going to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room, I remember my dream. It's the same damn room. Which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year, right when lockdown started. My wife has admitted they want to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room, eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room, I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. Come show time, my wife gets ready to begin pushing and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the doctor thinks delivery is still possible. But at this point I finally freak out into full panic, and demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor, I can tell, wants to argue, but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation, and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back, and as I'm in the ER I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital. But before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical but alive. Today they are both thriving and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan. Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news, and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave, he had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been, to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. I posted this another one of these threads a while back, so I'll copy/paste it here. I was very young, probably 7 to 8 years old. My mother had gone to the store and left me alone. This is early 80s in small town Mississippi, y'all. It was a different time. It had to be a Saturday morning because I was watching cartoons and I heard a knock on our front door. We didn't have a window or a peephole and it's small town BFE nowhere Mississippi, so I open the door and there's an elderly man standing there, bleeding from the head. He was wearing these thick gold Coke bottle glasses, a bright red short sleeve shirt with a pocket protector, blue jeans, and a belt buckle that had Eddie engraved on it in big letters. He said he was in a car accident down the road and if I could please call the police and fire department, since his wife was trapped in the car. I told him to come and sit down on our couch. He did and I shut the door. I went into the kitchen and called our local police department and told them about the accident. When they asked where the accident happened, I realized I didn't know, so I yelled out to the man, "What road did this happen on?" And I got no answer. I told the police to hold on, walked into the living room and the man was gone, like a fart in the wind. I didn't hear our squeaky ass door open, so I knew he didn't leave, and there was an imprint on the couch from where he had been sitting. I looked in my bathroom to see if maybe he had gone in there to wash the blood off his head and he wasn't there. I looked in my bedroom and my mom's bedroom, nothing. When I came back to the phone I told the police operator that he was gone and I didn't know he had left. I gave them my address and the police and fire department came to my house. I told them about what had happened, what the man had been wearing, everything. The police searched the area and found nothing. They talked to my neighbors who said they didn't hear anything and didn't see anyone matching the man's description. By this time my mom got back home, and I got in trouble for making a false police call. Months later, when I got off the school bus one afternoon, there were police cars everywhere at my house. A detective was waiting inside with my mom and said he wanted to ask me some questions about the phone call I made about the man asking for help a few months previously. When I told him the story again, and gave him the man's description, he just sat there staring at me open-mouthed. He thanked me for my time, told me I wasn't in trouble, and they gave me a police officer teddy bear. They talked to my mom for a bit and left. After they had been gone a few minutes, my mom called me back into the dining room and sat me down at the table and told me that the police had found a car that had driven off the road less than a mile from our house and had found 2 bodies inside. One was thought to be male and the other female. The car was completely destroyed and upside down, about 60 yards off the road in a very rural and heavily wooded area, which is why it took them so long to find them. The body thought to be male was wearing the exact same clothes I had described. Both of them were pinned inside the car upside down, and both were still wearing their seat belts. My family and friends treated me really weird for a long time. I have an idea of what may have happened, but I cannot definitively say how this happened. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence, as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind, I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, if this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I say to my mother, "Did you knock that cereal onto the floor?" She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the fuck, man? However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position, just the box of cereal was on the floor. When I was a kid, about 10-12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while Mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair, so naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Babe, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt 2 hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing. But no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell, where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures/posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam! 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc., all of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual FCK? At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him, no other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. Already posted this a year and a half ago, but I'll go again. I have to make a bit of a premise. When I was little, the woman that came to clean my house, I'll call her Mary, while my parents were working, was also my babysitter. Usually after she ended up cleaning she would bring me to her house until my mom would come and pick me up. There during the year I knew her whole family. Among these was her husband that I'll call Dave. So Dave was a pretty cool guy, just the average elder you would find in any rural town. He liked to drink wine with his friends at the bar, go hunting, and he had a lot of good and interesting stories to tell me when I was a kid, and after all these years spent together he basically considered me as a grandson. Now back when COVID hit for the first time in my country, I had a dream one night where Mary was coming to my house to clean as every other week, but this time in my living room there was a closed black coffin. When I asked her what was in there, she looked at me and said in a sad tone, "Dave is inside there." Now if that wasn't strange enough, I remember waking up later that night and feeling a presence to the side of my bed, and I distinctly remember to have said while still being half asleep, "Come on Dave, let me get back to sleep." Next morning when I woke, my parents told me that Mary had called saying that Dave had passed that night due to COVID complication. To this day I still haven't told anyone about it and I am still a bit freaked out from the whole story. Also sorry for format and grammar, but I'm on mobile and English isn't my first language. When I was going to my family's home I got an SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time, and after taking the SUV the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. The only way I can explain this one is wishful thinking. My mom and dad were codependent, and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people, other than the kids. They were completely happy to be just wrapped up in each other. My dad died the day before his birthday in a hospice center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside his recliner would go on by itself. The recliner would rock like someone was getting in it. And sometimes, my mom or my sister would hear my dad saying, "Honey, fix me a cold drink?" That was exactly how he'd ask my mom to fill up his massive mug with Sprite over ice. My mother died less than a year and a half later. After my mother died, there was never another sign of either of them being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years now. I was about 15 and trying to sleep but having an asthma attack. Late in the night I started hearing a rhythmic breathing from the floor next to the bed. It wasn't scary, more comforting. And it wasn't me, because my breathing sounded way more fucked up than that. It helped me calm down and get to sleep. Even though I was still sick, I was able to get my hands on an inhaler in the morning. At the time I thought it was a friendly ghost. I later rationalized that maybe I was hearing a family member through the heating ducts. What I realized years later, when I had a dog, was that it had sounded exactly like a big dog sleeping next to the bed. So now I'm 50-50 on whether a ghost dog came to visit me, or my own dog time traveled back about 10 years before she was born to comfort me. My siblings and I all had the same dream on the same night a year ago. It was exactly 1 year after my mom died and we all had a dream about her, and she was in the same place and was speaking to us. She reassured us that she was okay and she was with her mom and my dead siblings and that her dad is in the bad place. The next day we all realized we had the same dream, We even all independently drew a picture of the place we saw her and wrote down the name of the place it resembled. Most of my siblings took that as an actual message from my mum, but my youngest sister and I like to believe that we have all developed some freaky hive mind low-level telepathy lol. Very minor, but I still go what the fuck? When I remember. When I was a kid, around 6, I lived in a very arid area, and a wide field of red dirt was between my house and my buds. Every day, walking over there, when I got about halfway across, I'd pick up a dirt clod or a small rock, and toss it behind me over my shoulder. About 10 seconds later, it would come flying back over my head and land in front of me. I'd just grin and keep walking. I remember this really distinctly, even trying to replicate it later in childhood after I'd moved away, and being sad that it didn't work anymore. Didn't question it as a kid, but looking back, just really weird. Also, my job site is haunted, but this seems stranger. A family friend of ours, Gary, was terminally ill with cancer. He was a father figure to me and one of the few adult males from my previous life. I am a recovering alcoholic, that fully understood me. A friend and myself were in Moab, Utah and found a hostel to sleep in for the night. I had a dream about Gary. He looked amazing, completely healthy and backlit, and was wearing a multicolored sweater. He looked at me with concern in his eyes, pointed backwards and said, "I'm not doing too good." I woke up a bit shaken because it felt so real. I told my girlfriend about the dream and she asked if I needed to call my mom to see how he was doing. I told her that it wasn't necessary because I knew they would call me if Gary passed. That day we drove from Utah to Colorado and stayed in another hotel. About 5 a.m. I woke up and my phone was ringing. I could see that it was my mom and I already knew what she was going to tell me. She broke the news that Gary had passed and I basically explained to her that Gary came and told me goodbye. I'm tearing up IRL right now writing this. The picture that his wife picked for his obituary was Gary in that multicolored sweater he was wearing when he came to me in my dream. Not scary but still not explainable. When I was 22, I visited my grandma in her retirement home at Christmas. She was well, nothing out of the ordinary. A few days later I traveled to my then boyfriend across the country. 2 days after New Year's I woke up at 2 a.m. crying. And I just couldn't stop. I wasn't really sad or overly emotional, but the tears just kept streaming down my face. Nothing like that ever happened and I was kind of confused, as was my BF. I fell back asleep a few hours later. 3 days later I was informed that my grandma had died that night at about 2 a.m. Due to the divorce of my parents, communication was difficult and we were only informed after the funeral. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but it's hard to wrap my head around, especially since nothing like this ever happened again. There's a story from when I was 4 to 5 years old. My grandmother was looking through old family photos and asking me who the people were. We got to a picture of my grandfather, and she asked me who he was, and I said, Poppy Jim. He died suddenly at home when my mother was 10, in the same house we lived in, so I never met him. She asked me how I knew that. I told her, "Oh, he comes and tucks me in and tells me he loves me sometimes after you go to bed." When I was 9 or 10, it was a bad year. I was regularly physically and emotionally abused. But that year, I was sexually abused. On top of all that, I started having serious mental health issues. Well, when things were at their absolute worst, I started having dreams of this blonde lady telling me to hold on. That things would get better. It was so comforting and peaceful and continued as long as the extreme abuse continued. I didn't know who she was, I just figured I imagined her. Well, things finally simmer down, and the dreams stop. About a year later, Mom was going through old photo albums, and my blood freezes. I see the blonde woman from my dreams. I ask who she is. Turns out, it was an aunt I had who died shortly before I was born. I had a sort of demonic mask on my shelf, and one day while I was working at my desk no more than 4 feet away from it, it just flew off the shelf and shattered on the floor. It didn't just fall off the shelf, it was like someone threw it across the room. The baffling part to me is that I am the one who made the mask. So I know it's not cursed by some voodoo hex or something. I've had extremely vivid dreams of relatively inconsequential moments in my future life that I nonetheless keep locked away in a little corner of my head, and then when those moments actually occur, I get insane déjà vu that throws me off until I remember the dreams. It's a very bizarre thing, but it ultimately doesn't mean much to me. An edit since this seems to have blown up. Thank you everyone for sharing your similar experiences with this. And also thank you to those of you attempting to explain what could be going on when the events occur, no matter your stance on it. It's fascinating reading some of the details on what might cause it, or whether it's just some trick of the mind. It's very informative. Woke up 1 in the middle of the night to a man standing next to the bed staring at my so. He was slightly translucent and I figured it was just another sleep paralysis episode, had them before so knew the drill, and rolled over and went to go back to sleep. Normally being able to move isn't part of sleep paralysis, and immediately my heart began to race as I realized I need to roll over and check what I saw. Person was still standing there, staring at then he made eye contact with me. Stared at me for a while before turning around and walking to the wall, slowly fading away with each step. Next morning wakes up looking like shit and said she had the worst night's sleep because she kept having the feeling that someone was watching her. Glad we no longer live in that house. This is a long story. I got my driver's license at 22 years old and was a nervous driver. One summer in 2014, my parents were going to our family's beach house with my at the time toddler son, and I was going to meet them there the following Saturday morning as I had work. At the time I was driving a beat-up 2000 Chevy Cavalier with no air conditioning, and my cigarette lighter was broken so I could not charge my GPS system in the car. I also didn't have a smartphone at the time, so I figured I would charge my GPS overnight and it would survive the hour-and-a-half drive to my family's beach house. What I didn't take into account, due to being a freshly licensed driver, was that Saturday morning traffic on the NJ Garden State Parkway in the summer is a fucking nightmare. I also have an absolutely awful sense of direction and I can get a bit anxious when I get lost. I left my house around 8 in the morning and texted my parents that I would be at the beach house around 10 o'clock latest, and that I would take the baby to the beach when I got there. By 10:45 I was sitting in dead stop of traffic, sweating my butt off as there was no breeze. The GPS suggested I take a different exit than I normally would, and I jumped at the chance to get off the parkway. Whatever exit it wanted me to take also brought me to more dead stop traffic. At this point, my GPS was about to die and I had no idea where I was going. I didn't even have a bottle of water on me. Around 12:30, I was driving through random towns with no idea where I was, covered in sweat. My GPS had been dead for hours and I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I called my parents, who had no idea where I was, and they suggested I stop somewhere to ask for directions, but when I did find a fire station, no one was inside. I went back to my car utterly defeated and burst into tears. I didn't know what to do, and was half afraid I would never find my way home. I thought of my late uncle, who was a limo driver and the namesake of my son. I was sure he probably knew exactly where I was due to taking teenagers down the shore every year after their proms. I looked up at the ceiling of my car and cried, "Hey, Uncle C, I'm lost and afraid and I have to get to the baby. Where the hell am I?" All of a sudden, I heard the mechanical voice of the GPS say at the stop sign, "Make a right." I looked down at the GPS and saw that it was no longer dead, but it wasn't fully on either. Instead of it showing a map or the main menu, it was just a blank white screen. It repeated to me, at the stop sign, "Make a right." I figured I had maybe a minute or so before it died again, so I went to the stop sign and made the right. The GPS directed me for the next half an hour to the front of my family's beach house. As soon as I parked the car, instead of the typical "you have reached your destination" that the GPS usually said, it just went, "Goodbye," and then died again. I had never heard it say goodbye to me before that day, and I never heard it say that again. My family and I are convinced that my uncle helped me find my way home through the GPS. And yes, I got a smartphone that same year for Christmas, so I would always have access to a GPS lol. I've told these stories on an account I used to have that I can't for the life of me remember how to log into. When I was an older teenager, everyone in the house had just gone to sleep. It was around midnight, and me and my sister always slept with our bedroom door open. I had a clear view of the kitchen table from my bedroom since it was the first bedroom leading away from the living room, but all the lights were off and it was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything. As I drifted off to sleep, the clear, unmistakable sound of a kitchen chair sliding loudly across the kitchen floor jolted me awake. I was terrified to look into the kitchen from my bed. My dad got up right away and came down the hall in his tighty whities and turned the lights on to investigate. Think Harry, beer belly blue collar redneck, and there was no one in the kitchen. We were all in bed, including the dogs. The sound woke everyone up. All we could really do was go back to sleep and hope the rest of the night was quiet. Another time in the same house, I was going into the kitchen, again close to midnight, to put a glass in the sink. There was a window above the sink that had one of those solid, pull-down blind shades. As I got to the sink, the blind suddenly went flying up and rolled up into itself. I flew out of the kitchen at lightning speed. Once when my boyfriend was leaving to go home when I was around 20 or 21, again, around midnight. We tiptoed to the front door in the darkness and I was telling him bye, and the disc tray and the DVD player in the living room opened and closed a few times by itself while we both stood there wide-eyed and staring at it. He was like, "Valp, gotta go," and left, and I sprinted back to my room. I'm fully convinced the house has something bad in it, and it always felt very evil. I lived there from the time I was 10 until I was 23. I used to have horrific nightmares about something evil being in the walk-in closet of the master bedroom. In my dreams it was always a big black shadow/mass that was trying to drag me into the closet, and I would be frantically trying to escape it in slow motion. Or it would be hovering near the foot of my bed slowly inching towards me. The terror I felt in those dreams was always so real. And I couldn't stand to be in or near that closet for more than a few minutes at a time. I always had the overwhelming feeling to run if I was around it for too long. I had to start sleeping with a lamp on when I got to be around 19 because I was always sleeping in a state of fright, and to this day at 31 I'm scared to sleep alone in complete darkness. But the dreams basically stopped when I moved out. Neither of my parents could stand to sleep in the master bedroom for longer than a few months at a time. My dad swears that one night while he was sleeping in there alone, my mom had started sleeping in the living room at that point, that he felt the blankets tug on one side of him, so when he rolled over to see what it was he heard a voice in his ear on the other side whisper, "Liar. Liar. Liar." He did not spend the rest of the night in there. Years later my parents gave sleeping in there another try for a few months, and my baby niece was living with us. There was a crib for her at the foot of my parents' bed, and my dad said he woke up and saw the shape of my niece sitting up in her crib in the darkness, and he went to nudge my mom awake to tell her to get the baby, but my mom had already taken my niece into the living room and neither of them were in the room. My dad basically hightailed it out of there and the baby-shaped shadow was gone. My brother claims that he had a sleep paralysis episode of something sitting on his chest and strangling him. Which was odd to me, because I remember when we first moved into the house I briefly slept in my brother's room. And I had the most peaceful dream at 10 years old that I was in a beautiful, sunny and very green forest, and there was an intense feeling of peace washing over me. And in my dream I had the understanding that God was with me and that everything was okay. I used to hang out in my brother's room and play video games with him, and not once was I ever spooked or afraid in there. Now only my dad lives in the house, my parents are separated, and he sleeps in the literal diagonal opposite end of the house from the master bedroom closet. He turned the den right by the front door into his bedroom, and his bed is in the farthest corner of the room. He spends all his time at home reading the Bible and making his own ammo. My boyfriend, same one, jokes around every now and then that maybe my dad will give us the house one day, and my response is always heck no. I don't want to live there. It's haunted. I worked third shift in the emergency room. When a baby was born, a little chime would play over the hospital speakers. I think it was Rock-a-Bye Baby. One night a man was driven in by car. It was an odd and he was unconscious. The nurses and docs were doing CPR on the stretcher on the way to the trauma room. Sadly he passed away. The second that the doc called time of death all the lights in the emergency room went out. The backup generator came on and Rock-a-Bye Baby played immediately after the generator kicked in. This all took less than a minute. To this day I still remember the chills I got that night. Whatever it was so freaky. The second was when my spouse and I were looking to buy a house. We pulled up with a realtor and I immediately did not want to go in that house. It felt wrong. Well, we went in anyway. The second we got in, I felt like I was trespassing and wanted to leave. We walked through the house and the realtor opens the door to the basement and turned on the light. As soon as the light came on, I saw a black shadow run. We both saw it and thought it was my spouse, so we went down. All the strings that you pull to turn the lights on and off were tied like nooses. It was creepy as all get out. My spouse came down the stairs and I asked them what they were doing upstairs since we both thought they were down in the basement. Spouse said they were in the garage and was not in the basement. Right as we were leaving the basement, something pushed me. I felt the hand on my back and everything. As soon as we left we both said that house was haunted. That night spouse and I both had the same nightmare about an old lady in black and with frizzy hair. The nightmares lasted about a week for both of us. I am not religious, but the only thing that got rid of this old lady was saying the Our Father prayer over and over again. It still scares the crap out of me to this day. I don't even drive on that street, that is how scared I am of that house. I don't know if I'd call it supernatural, but it was freaky and I still don't understand. I was in the kitchen cleaning up waiting for my kid's bus. I saw it pull up, and saw him get off. He didn't come in, but he'd started playing around with hiding under the window to jump out at me and say boo, so I thought that's what he was doing. But I walked out and he wasn't there. I called his name, and looked around the house thinking he was hiding from me, but I couldn't find him. I circled the house calling for him, and the parent panic set in. It probably only lasted 90 seconds but it felt a lot longer. Then his bus pulled up and he got off.